I don't mind saying this because I have said it publicly before. I think that they, to some degree, took audience from the Chicago Symphony because it was more convenient, lower price. You drive your car right up to a lot in front of the hall and park it and so forth. I don't know how many more of those there are. That one I happen to personally experience. That's part of the data collection, and that's why we've decided to have this R&D function to really understand the tapestry. But the thing is, the orchestras that have cut back or are offering less work are the ones that make news. The Elgins don't get talked about as much.
This is true, and isn't it you, Henry, who have talked to me many times about a major East Coast newspaper that covered a financial crisis in an orchestra of that general size, and then when the crisis was fixed, never returned to the story.
When invited to.
When invited to.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't mind telling you what the orchestra was because it was much bigger than Elgin's. The Louisville Orchestra,
yes.
An orchestra with an important history in America that in the mid-'90s almost went into bankruptcy, got rescued, managed to survive. It's had some problems since then, but it's still playing. There was a major article where that was front page art section and then inside, and talked about how this great orchestra with this history of great American music recordings was likely to go out of business and so forth. And then a few years later, when I actually contacted one of the person who wrote the article, actually, I contacted and said, you know, it's turned around, and I think you ought to do the rest of the story. He said, you're absolutely right, and then 3 days later sent me an email saying the editors aren't interested. And it proves the point, sadly, that the bad news is more interesting than the good news.
And so we can add to the League's burden the education of the press. But let me get back now to something you said that I thought was very important and very resonant. You said you prefer to think of yourself as serving orchestras as opposed to representing them. And the positive reasons for that, I think you've made very clear in everything you've said, because you've named so many ways in which you're able to serve, to help, to bring together, to inspire, many, many, many things. I think in spite of this, you're often taken, including by our friends, yours and mine in the press, to be the representative of orchestras in America, because here you are, the president of the American Symphony Orchestra League. And if something happens that appears to have national significance, who are the press going to call for a quote, if not you? So what is that like? Why do you feel you can't represent American orchestras, and what do you do when you're called upon to do it?
Well, I didn't mean to say that we can't represent. What I meant to say was that our prime function is to serve. And I believe that even as we represent, we have to serve. There are actually a few ways in which we do represent. One, before I even get to your direct question, is at the government level, where we lobby for funding, for the NEA, at least to the lobby in whatever ways we can legally as a nonprofit organization. And we also work to represent orchestra's interests in visa and other issues. So we have that
Which are
role.
not small things.
Oh, no, especially since September 11, 2001.
Right.
You try to get a foreign artist, especially on short notice, if it's a last-minute substitute for a cancellation. It's really hard, and we can help with that. So that's both serving and representing. But also, in terms of your question about the press, I think what I always have to think about, and I have a wonderful help from Julia Kirshausen, our vice president for communications, to keep me honest, I have to think about my response and does it serve the field as well as reflect honesty and integrity. I will never lie, and I will never give a response I don't believe in. But it is possible that I could see myself saying, I just don't think I can get into that because, frankly, I don't think the answer will be helpful to the field that I serve. So the service to me comes first, as we are, after all, you have to remember what we are. We're a membership organization. Orchestras pay dues to belong to the League. We are, if all of our members decided to stop paying, we wouldn't exist.
But, you know, I guess what I'm getting at when I ask you about representing orchestras is the, I think, very tricky question of to what extent you are able to say, I speak for orchestras when I say X. X is what orchestras believe, and I am now the one who articulates that to the larger public. Because it's not clear what orchestras as a group believe. I'm not sure there is an organization, a way in which this gets discussed and articulated, although maybe the League is it. To what extent, actually, there's a question. What extent is or isn't the League that? The body that can discover what it is American orchestras think and say that to the public.
I honestly believe, Greg, that ability only exists at the really 20,000-foot level. Because when you start getting below that level, it's nonsense to think that orchestras believe anything is a unit. The question that used to amuse me when I managed the Chicago Symphony or any other orchestra, people would say, what do the musicians think about X? Well, there are 110 of them, and there are at least 110 and maybe 220 opinions. And, you know, to think that, I mean, orchestras believe that symphonic music is an important part of human civilization and its heritage, and that it should continue to play an important part in our lives. Orchestras believe that music education in the schools is a very important component of educating the next generation of citizens. On that level, I can comfortably speak for the field. Once I say to myself, well, you know, the New York Philharmonic believes this, but the Tacoma Symphony believes that, and the Omaha Symphony believes that, and they all differ, then I have to say there isn't an opinion. Just as I say, you can't say the musicians of an orchestra all believe something. And that's why, by the way, we get back to orchestra committees, they have a problem. One of the problems orchestra committees have in representing the orchestra is there isn't always a view. You know, I used to tell a wonderful story, and for this I'll keep the conductor anonymous, but a guest conductor appeared for 2 weeks in a row in Chicago, and I got 2 letters from 2 musicians after his 2 weeks were finished, both good musicians, both senior musicians with about 25 or 30 years in the Chicago Symphony, one a string player, one a wind player. One of them said, it's an insult to the Chicago Symphony that you have Conductor X on the podium of this orchestra. You expect me to play my instrument at a certain level. This man's hands are absolutely unclear. None of us can figure out what he means. And it's impossible. If you don't have the craft of conducting down, you shouldn't be conducting the Chicago Symphony. The other musician said, there isn't a conductor you bring in that I look forward to with more warm and keen anticipation than Conductor X. He makes the most magical, wonderful music. Thank you for bringing him. There you are. What I did, by the way, was I covered up the names, Xeroxed the 2 letters, and sent them to the opposite person with a note from me that said, see how hard it is to get a consensus around here. So I think part of our job at the League is to recognize when it is appropriate to speak for orchestras and when it isn't.
And this is tricky, because I'm thinking now of the 1993 report called Americanizing the American Orchestra, which, if you read it now, is the most unremarkable thing in the world. It says things that I think everybody agrees with. There should be more relations with the community. Orchestra should have more to do with American culture, more ethnic diversity. But at the time, it was explosive. It was published as a League document, as if saying, the League believes in this. There was bad press in the New York Times. Some of the major orchestras, as I understand it, had never liked it in the first place. And the thing was effectively buried. It's even rare to find anybody talking about it today. So that may have been a time when the League made an attempt to articulate policy for orchestras, or at least a direction that did not work out.
Without wanting to get into a lot of detail, because I lived through that period, and as the executive director of the Chicago Symphony, I was one of those large orchestra managers that was on the side of supporting that document. But when you start to, and mind you, that wasn't a document that said, here's what orchestras think. That was a document that said, here's what we think orchestras should do.
Which is worse in a way.
Well, harder.
Harder, but more stringent to the orchestras.
Okay, and therein lies the issue. When you start to do that, and we